The scent of home was supposed to bring comfort, but after 9 months at sea hauling freight across the Pacific, my return flight was fueled by a single visual. My wife Amanda running into my arms at the terminal while my kids, Ethan and Lily, tackled my legs. Packed tightly inside my duffel bag were the treasures I had brought back for them. A hand-carved compass for my son, and a mermaid locket for my daughter. I had replayed that homecoming 1,000 times in my head, while staring out at dark ocean waves, clinging to the promise of family to get through the grueling shifts. Yet, when the cab finally dropped me off, I wasn't greeted by open arms. I stood across the street, staring at a nightmare in broad daylight. Parked in my driveway was a pristine white convertible draped in streamers, bearing a tacky red frame that read, "Just Married." Upstairs, through an open window, I saw the flutter of Amanda's floral robe, and on the porch bench sat her favorite accent pillow. It was my house, but I was suddenly an intruder. Before I could even process the visual shock, my phone vibrated in my palm. The text from Amanda was devoid of greeting, explanation, or regret. "Don't bother coming. The locks are changed. The kids don't want you. It's over." She didn't offer a conversation or ask to talk. She simply declared me erased from the life I had nearly killed myself to support. 9 months on a cargo ship surrounded by deep water teaches a man 2 things: absolute patience and cold endurance. I didn't scream, I didn't storm the front door, and I didn't dial her number to beg. I simply typed back 3 words. "As you wish," and immediately called my attorney, Dean Walker. "Initiate everything," I told him, keeping my voice flat. No warnings. Full burn. It was 3:41 p.m. By nightfall, joint banking accounts were frozen, initial legal custody motions were drafted, and the neighborhood rumor mill was spinning. By midnight, 22 unanswered calls sat on my screen, culminating in a panicked, frantic voicemail from her lawyer that cut off mid-sentence. For years, I had quietly ignored the subtle warning signs, the razor-thin sharpness in her voice when I called across time zones, the deliberate exclusion of me from her social media posts, and the cold distance that grew with every contract I signed. Amanda was a master of appearances, a professional manipulator who hid behind quiet tears whenever I departed for work. While she spent months posting curated photos and playing the lonely housewife, I had spent long nights at sea, realizing that if she ever betrayed our family, I wouldn't crumble. I would execute a plan. Standing in the dark, watching the warm lights of my home glow while a stranger moved behind the curtains, I knew the man who left on that ship was gone. The woman who just threw me into the gutter had no idea what kind of calculated storm she had just invited into her life. By dawn, I had secured a hotel room and checked into the local bank branch the moment the doors unlocked. I stripped her access from our primary finances and initiated property proceedings for the house, which was held entirely in my name. When the divorce pre-filings landed in her inbox, alongside a formal 48-hour notice to vacate, I hired a locksmith to replace the security hardware she had just installed with biometric locks, keyed exclusively to my thumbprint. Around mid-morning, her calls began flooding in. When I let them go to voicemail, she left a message using her carefully rehearsed, calm voice. "You're seriously overreacting, Jason. We should talk. I thought we were adults." There was no apology for changing the locks, no remorse for handing my life to someone else, just an attempt to manage the collateral damage now that her safety net was collapsing. The final straw came at noon when my daughter's school called to verify if I had authorized Amanda's new boyfriend, a man named Qley, to be added as a primary emergency contact. Driving straight to the administration office, I produced court-stamped custody filings, stripped both of their permissions from the school records, and forwarded the documentation directly to her attorney with a note that I was unavailable for informal negotiations. That evening, I returned to the neighborhood one last time to find the party decorations gone and the driveway empty. Amanda sent a series of desperate texts claiming emotional abandonment, insisting that my extended work deployments had voided our implicit contract. But I hadn't worked myself to the bone so she could turn our home into a staging ground for a replacement husband. I chose silence over confrontation, yanked the foundation out from under her illusions, and waited for the legal machinery to grind forward. 2 days later, Amanda cornered me while I was eating breakfast in the hotel dining room. Slipping into the chair across from me, she attempted to deploy her familiar routine, softening her voice and framing her actions as a tragic lapse in judgment brought on by loneliness. When I pointed out the just married paraphernalia in the driveway, her composure faltered into defensive anger. She claimed the decorations were symbolic, shifted the blame back onto my career choice, and accused me of playing the victim. I didn't engage in the debate. I simply dropped a $50 bill on the table to cover the meal, stood up, and walked out while she was still raising her voice in front of the restaurant staff. She had mistaken my physical absence for weakness, forgetting that sailors don't drown quietly. They navigate through the wreckage and bring the tide back with them. That afternoon, Dean served Cole with a formal cease and desist order, alongside a court summons, after learning he had been driving my personal truck and claiming parental authority over my children. When Amanda texted to accuse me of being vindictive and keeping the kids hostage, I didn't bother to write back. The children had already seen through the theater. When I picked up Ethan and Lily from school, my daughter threw her arms around my neck, whispering that she thought I was gone forever, while my son quietly asked if they could come live with me permanently. We spent that evening eating takeout on the floor of a modest rental house, enjoying a stillness that felt like sanity for the first time in years. When Amanda filed an emergency motion, claiming I had unlawfully taken the children, her strategy backfired in spectacular fashion. Dean entered the courtroom armed with months of archived text messages, school records, and counselor evaluations that exposed her instability and deceit. Amanda sat in her tailored blazer, attempting to project the image of a grieving mother, but the narrative disintegrated under cross-examination. When the judge invited Ethan to speak, my son calmly stated that staying with me felt safer and quieter. The court granted me temporary primary custody and restricted Amanda to supervised visits. She stormed out of the building before the clerk could finish printing the order, only to post a photo on social media later that night with a caption about surviving trial by fire, unaware that her entire life was burning down because of her own choices. Desperate to maintain control, Cole attempted to show up at the children's school the following morning under the guise of dropping off a forgotten lunchbox, only to be promptly intercepted by security officers and escorted off the premises for violating the restraining order. Hours later, Amanda showed up at my rental property, pounding on the door and accusing me of destroying the family unit. When I opened the door just far enough to address her, she broke into tears, claiming she had simply been lonely while I was away supporting the household. I reminded her that while I was missing milestones and pulling double shifts on cargo decks, she was busy orchestrating my replacement. I shut the door on her excuses, and later that evening, when Ethan asked if I still loved his mother, I gave him the honest truth, sight. I loved the person she used to be, but some people change into someone you can no longer reach. The next morning, an unmarked package arrived on my porch, containing Amanda's wedding ring. I held the metal in my hand, feeling no rage or nostalgia, only the cold weight of a contract that had been stripped of its meaning. Rather than returning it or throwing a dramatic fit, I tossed the ring into a drawer alongside dead batteries and old receipts. Over the following week, her approach shifted from anger to pleading. She left voicemails admitting her world was falling apart and sent old family photos from our vacations, begging to rebuild what we once had. But staring at those photos, I realized the happiness in them was an illusion she had put on like a costume. My reply was a single text line: "I'm raising them without lies now." Recognizing that her legal position was untenable and her leverage was gone, Amanda's legal team requested a full settlement. I signed the final divorce decree alone in my kitchen while the kids were asleep, feeling neither triumph nor grief, but profound relief. The noise faded over the following months. Amanda's secondary relationships collapsed, her promises of lavish trips to the kids fell flat, and Ethan and Lily settled comfortably into a routine defined by stability. During a weekend hike up the coastal ridge, as the sun set over the Pacific, my son took a photo of the three of us and announced he was framing it for his room. Standing on that overlook with my children, I realized I didn't need an apology or an explanation to move forward. The quiet strength of our new reality was all the closure I required. A month later, a long handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox. Amanda wrote about her childhood, her internal insecurities, and her habit of projecting unhappiness onto others, framing her infidelity as an unthinking reaction to her own internal struggles, rather than a deliberate betrayal. She asked for understanding, if not forgiveness. I read it once, folded the paper, and put it away without responding. The time for dissecting her motivations had passed. What mattered was that Lily was laughing freely at the dinner table, Ethan was planning his future without anxiety,